Welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament podcast is meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. This episode of Poetry of Predicament, join us in welcoming our guest, Inder Comar. And welcome to another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast. I'm Dean Walker. This is it November 25th today, Inder?
Today is the 25th of November.
25th, thank you for that. Other than having him here to remind me what day it is, I'm very pleased to have Inder Comar here with us. Inder is a new to me writer on a number of internet sources that I happen to scan from time to time. And I am thrilled that you're joining us here today to share a little bit about what sounds to me like a robust professional life, very different than the authors that I usually read in this particular realm of the possible collapse of systems. And one of our favorite questions around here is, who will we be in the face of our shared predicaments? And Inder, I've just got to say, your writing, not only is your background refreshing, you bring an entirely different perspective from a very different kind of lifestyle and focus of attention. But there's just this directness that I really have appreciated. And I just got through reading, I guess it was an address that you did at Lafayette College. So I hope we'll get to that. But before that, I'd like to ask you to introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about that robust professional life. And then hopefully we'll bridge from there into the more personal side of things that you share so beautifully in your writing. So Inder Comar, welcome.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here and to share a little bit about me and about the work that I'm doing and about what I think are the very aligned kind of personal interests and professional interests about the direction of our civilization.
Mm-hmm.
So I think as you were referencing, I'm an attorney, and I have basically two different organizations. One is a for-profit practice that basically I've been building for about the last 8 years. I've been practicing law for about 12 years. And, my career started off very, I would say, traditionally. I went to a law school in New York. I went to NYU Law. And then after that, I worked for a big global law firm for about 4 years. And then after that time, I set up my own law practice based in the Bay Area that's now grown, and we have offices in New York and San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
The last few years, I was actually working on a big pro bono case about the Iraq War that ended this year in March. And, that experience, that case kind of fell into my lap. And while working on that case, and since the case ended, I had a lot of inspiration that this is really my passion, this type of work. And I remembered it was kind of the main reason I went to law school, right? So, you make these decisions early in your life. And I think as the reality of economic need kicks in and everything like that, you make other choices, because you want to have a standard of living, or you have, loans or whatever it is, you make choices. And, one of the nice things about having my own practice was that I had a lot of freedom and flexibility to take cases that were of interest to me, even on a pro bono basis. So this year I set up a nonprofit called Just Atonement. And the work of the nonprofit is to work on two, what I see are the biggest issues of our day. One is climate change and the challenges presented by climate change to us both in the United States and globally. And the second issue that it addresses are issues of war and peace. And this is, again, that was kind of an outcome or outgrowth of the case that I did in the last 4 years, where we were trying to hold people accountable for the Iraq War. And as I worked on these issues, I realized that they're actually quite linked, and that if we're going to be successful in managing and handling the really incredible challenge presented by climate change, we're going to have to work at a civilizational level to reintroduce things that have already existed for hundreds of years, but we just don't use, like the concept of dialogue and international affairs, the concept of working together and settling our differences through pacific means. These are all concepts that have existed in international law, well before you and I have walked on this earth. So, part of what we're trying to do is just reawaken or reanimate these old concepts and use those not only to handle our differences globally, but also to put everyone on the same team and to look at the great challenge that awaits us really at a civilizational level, and that's the challenge of climate change.
Right. May I stop you there for just a moment? I want to reassure, I'm sure, a very small fraction of my audience that by small, I'll get to why I'm saying small. I want to let you know how very interested I am in what you've just laid out. Each of the different types of legal scenarios that you have interest in, and why, and what your apparent orientation is to it, is of great interest to me. And I think it is exactly lined up with what is relevant with regard to conversations about climate change and other other environmental metrics on the planet. And so I'm hoping, this is way ahead of when I should be saying this, but I'm hoping that we will have many conversations from here out, and where we can go really further into the details of these other cases that you're talking about. Today, I believe we're going to end up talking quite a bit more about climate change, and we're going to go down that particular track. Yeah. But I just want to let you know I'm also very, very interested in this track you just talked about and how it relates, for instance, to the conversation about Iraq. So let's put a post-it there for hopefully a later interview, and I'd love to go into depth. And sorry that I interrupted you. And there was one piece I wanted to find out if it's appropriate to put in the lexicon of where you're headed, and that is the notion of the commons and the notion of various aspects of our physical world, of the earth, having standing on their own, just as entities.
Yes.
So I'm hoping that those communicate. I don't know the right legal jargon to throw out there to ask, but please continue. And I'm sorry for interrupting you, but I just wanted to put that post-it in there.
Absolutely, yeah. So we can talk about that. So basically, the last year has been very important for me to focus more of my time and energy on these issues. And what we're doing at Just Atonement is a lot of legal research, particularly on climate, as to how we can use law and courts as a mechanism of accountability for our leaders, to really get them to do something, to do the things that they need to do in order to preserve our civilization. And there's a lot of really interesting cases out there right now where people are advancing incredibly new theories that the courts are open to, and that's very surprising to me. But courts are listening. I think judges are finally getting it. This notion of standing, I think, is a very important one because for the last 50 or so years, the federal courts have been limiting the ability of people to access justice, and thinking about new and clever ways, creative ways that, for example, a river could access the court and say, a litigant could approach the court on behalf of the river, a friend of the river, and say this river needs support from the court. I think those are theories that are supportable under current case law, and part of what we're doing at my nonprofit is researching ways that we can explore those theories to really approach the court with urgent problems and say this is not something that someone else can deal with. We have to deal with this, and we're asking the court to issue some relief. So yeah, so those are all really important and interesting questions that I'm just spending more of my time on professionally.
Right. So we've just mentioned, both of us over the past few minutes, something about a recent talk that you gave, an address at, I believe it was Lafayette College. And I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about what that talk was and just give us a little mini tour of what you covered in that address.
Absolutely, yeah. So I was invited to speak by a student group there, and it was a really phenomenal experience for a number of reasons. One is the format for me was very unique, where as a lawyer, I was asked to give a 20-minute, 25-minute address, and then afterwards there was about an hour question and answer with scientists. So it was actually very novel in terms of the approach, in terms of it was very cross-disciplinary. So you had people from different research backgrounds, professional backgrounds, and I think you had having the presence of a lawyer with a scientist, I think, was very important, because a lot of times scientists they come and they approach me and they'll say they think they have trouble advocating. That for them it's difficult to get their message across about the urgency and importance of action today. So that was really, I thought, novel and a very great approach, and we're hoping to replicate that at other universities. Secondly, the talk was basically about Puerto Rico, and so the focus of the talk, I think, and that was also a good way to make the talk relevant, was to take something from recent news, and it allowed me and the professors the ability to focus on a specific case study and say this was the Puerto Rico example, and this is how it was amazing. There were people in the audience from Puerto Rico, and when they were able to speak during the Q&A, I mean, many of them became quite emotional, talking about the devastation, and it made it very personal. And that allowed me to really lay out what I see as both the current situation and the future situation. The current situation, in my view, is dire, I think, and I called Puerto Rico the canary in the coal mine, in the sense that this is maybe the last warning we have as a country. It's relevant to us. Puerto Rico is part of America, but this is. I mean, the time to take action is so urgently needed. And when you look at the devastation, not only of Puerto Rico, but I also referenced the wildfires this summer in California, where people I know lost their homes, that caused great devastation. I was able to really talk about a lot of the theoretical things that people have been talking about in terms of the effects of climate change, and to say that isn't theory. I mean, that's reality. So when people talk about climate refugees as something that's going to happen in the future, it's not happening in the future. It's happening right now. It's happening in Puerto Rico. It happened in California. When people are talking about extreme weather conditions, it's not something that's going to happen in the future. That happened this past summer. So it was a really good way to make concrete and plain a lot of the things you read about what's quote unquote going to happen to us. It's happening to us present tense. And if that isn't enough to wake people up, I'm not sure what is, frankly. But that was the exposition. And then finally, I ended the talk, and this is actually a big focus of mine, both professionally and personally, about what we can do about it. And in my view, I think it's critical that we work there. I think it's a call to action to us spiritually in a lot of ways, is to say we're here on this earth right now at this specific moment. Why are we here? Why are you and I here at this time? And I think there's a reason for it. And I think the reason is that you and I are the last hope, maybe, for our civilization and for our children. And it's incumbent upon us to ask kind of deep questions about why are we here at this time. And I think that there is the possibility of an awakening, and to set aside maybe what they thought their life might look like, or set aside cultural expectations, and to really, as a call to arms, to think about how they could make a big difference at this time, to push the earth in a different future, and to really help preserve our civilization in a way that I think still exists. I think the possibility of a positive outcome, I think, still exists. I think that window is slowly closing. But I think now is the time that we have to take action. And my hope is that to continue that theme where people can really ask soul searching questions and recognize that it's on you and us. It's on you and me together to do this. It's not going to be anybody else.
Right. Well, thank you for that layout of what must have been a remarkable talk. I didn't realize that there was that kind of not only abundant time for Q&A after your talk, but also to have various scientists at the ready to address a certain portion of the Q&A. Do I have that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So that just sounds like the kind of discourse that should be going on around the world, but especially in this country. So I'm very glad that you shared that with us. I'm definitely the choir that you are preaching to over here. We're completely resonant, everything I'm hearing you saying, with possibly one exception. And so I should just show you my full hand right up front, which is that I've always considered myself a very environmentally conscious and engaged and caring person, but I too had my career life and got distracted and got into the corporate kind of suck of the game and took my attention away from the earth for quite some time. And I've been grappling with that in terms of just my complicity in this whole thing since about 3 years ago, when I heard a presentation about abrupt climate change,
Sure.
as opposed to the regular climate change that is so has been debated so long with the deniers and so on. Mm-hmm. The one that we seem to have so much difficulty even getting our heads around at a basic level. Abrupt climate change is ferocious compared to even the ferocity that we're looking at, that you described so beautifully around Maria and the other hurricanes this season, and on the list goes. I guess what I've been left with is this is an extraordinary time indeed, and I am in desperate search for hope, little nodes of hope.
Yeah.
I absolutely appreciate your articulation of where you go and how you get there, to keep your heart open, to keep moving forward in a good way and being not only inspired, but inspiring other people. So I absolutely applaud you, and please don't hear any criticism there. But I've just got to say that I have been particularly discouraged in these past 3 years, and in the past year, I can't find hyperbole anymore. It's extraordinary what we're facing. And so I did appreciate your layout. I think it's in a few instances on the conservative side. Mm-hmm. Certainly, again, I'm not at all interested in trying to debate, what the timing of breakdown of some human or Earth system will be. Yeah. I'm mentioning it because I just want to share my side of the similar issues that you talked about in your brief description of the Lafayette talk. I'm curious if there's a particular part of, because I know you really gave a broad sweep in the Lafayette talk. I'm wondering if there are particular elements of what's troubling the world right now that really, more than anything else, get your attention. Like when you have a little extra time, you go there to research, you go there to put your attention on it. I could say that mine is the ocean. I've just always been an ocean guy. Sure. I'm wondering, do you have a similar focus that you go to?
You said a lot there. I want to unpack all of it if I can. So we'll start with your question, and then I want to talk briefly about the sentiment you shared about just how daunting it all is, and it is very daunting. And I'm not going to lie that you have good days and bad days. I mean, there's not. I think but yeah, I think going to your first immediate question, I'm an ocean guy too, but I really, and for me, I'm not a scientist. I was trained as in international relations at university, and I went to law school.
Mhm.
But the science, honestly, people shouldn't be scared of the science. And this one thing I tell people is just pick up a newspaper. Read the newspapers do a pretty good job of laying out the science, and then look at the journals, read the abstracts. I don't think that they're that daunting or scary. I think the conclusions can be daunting and scary, but I think the actual logic and thought process is actually very important that people pick up and read. They should come to their own conclusions, because I think the scientific method we've had it for hundreds of years. You have to trust it. I mean, the scientific method took us to the moon. It's created these fabulous technologies. If it's telling us that these systems are in dire conditions, I think we have a duty to listen to that. In terms of the actual systems that I think about, the environmental, like the ocean systems, I think are critical. I'm a big ocean guy too. I want to say I'm focused also on the spiritual social system, that we have, and in terms of addressing these challenges, because I do think that it's part of the problem, I think, and this relates to something early you said about how you thought about your complicity. And it sounds, just to share something, I think that, I don't want you to be too hard on yourself, or I don't want people to be too hard on themselves in terms of when they had this awakening. I mean, we really enter this civilization and this culture with very different messages, right? So the messages that we're receiving from an early age through our early professional life don't talk about this at all. And there's no concept. It's really up to us to kind of leave the cave, to use, Plato's allegory of the cave. It's really up to us to leave it, and then we come back and we see the shadows on the wall. But that's a moment that we all go through. And, to the extent that we're complicit, I think the complicity comes after you've had the awakening. So after you've seen it, if you still continue to ignore the reality, that's certainly, I think, we can maybe reserve some judgment for that. But before all that, I think it's hard to judge ourselves, and I wouldn't be too hard on yourself. But what I'm focused on now through the nonprofit and through giving these talks is, my hope is that you can push people towards that awakening, and you can kind of shake them a bit and say, I know because it's very easy to box out the science. It's very easy to pretend that the science doesn't exist and that doesn't affect us, and that we can live our lives based on a preconceived fantasy. I think it's very easy to do that. And I think what I'm trying to do in the system maybe that I'm focused on is connecting our consciousness, each person's consciousness, to the global system that we inhabit, and just, making people kind of just look at it and say, look, this is what's going on. Your life 50 years from now, 20 years from now, is going to be different. And we can do something about it today, but you're going to have to do something differently today. And so I think when you ask, like, my spare time, like, what am I really focused on? I think it's that type of system, and kind of connecting us individually as individual pieces of sentience to the larger sentience that's around us, because we are very disconnected from it, and kind of making people have that awakening moment. And I think if you do that, you really, you can really, one candle isn't going to light the world, but 1,000 candles or 10,000 candles can bring a lot of light. And I think maybe what we can do is act as that inspiration, be the candle for the other candles that haven't been lit. And then all of a sudden you have a force that can actually make a significant contribution at this time to what the future might look like.
Right. Well, thank you for that. And if you don't mind, maybe I could just suggest a little slight shift here. Sure. In that direction. I named my book, I wrote a book about my process of awakening that you were just describing from 3 years ago, because I immediately had to vet the information, because either this is the wackiest bullshit that had ever come down the pike,
right,
or this is the real deal, and it is actually the transformation of humanity, and it is the largest scale disruption that we've ever had to handle, making World Wars I and II to combined look like nothing.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right.
And so my book, I ended up calling The Impossible Conversation, because I've been in the training business a long time, and worked with people, with organizations, with business groups and community groups and so on. And always the idea is, how can we grow together? How can we learn together? Obviously in the business settings with, return on investment in mind and so on. But always with the notion of how can we best change, and how can we find the limit of our ability to change, and then just ever so slightly go over that limit so that we can change even more and bring ourselves even more life and more goodness and so on.
Right.
So I just knowing what I know about the basics of that process at a pretty pedestrian level, pretty usual business as usual paradigm level, I knew that for us to confront the kind of things you and I are talking about right now, that this would indeed be the impossible conversation.
Yeah.
And the subtitle of the book is Choosing Reconnection and Resilience at the End of Business as Usual. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. And so while I hear you taking on that, a very similar kind of a calling, mm-hmm. to have these conversations in your way with people, and to suggest to others, it's kind of reach one, teach one, and ripple out. And I don't know if there's a whole lot we could hope for than what you've just described. So I'm very much with you. But I've been noticing really my whole life, but especially again in this past year, it's hard not to notice the immense clamp of control at so many levels, some of them very overt and obvious, and some of them well behind multiple layers of smoke and mirrors, that really won't allow rippling out at any significant scale. Which again, I don't mean to be saying, well, so we should all do nothing and we should all give up. And I please don't hear that. I can sometimes be interpreted that way. So, because I have a grumpy style sometimes. But I guess what I'm asking is, given your very unique way of seeing the world, given your education, your profession, we talked very briefly about finding standing for people, for certain populations, and also for elements of the Earth systems herself. Yeah. And ways to interact in a new and different way at a larger scale. I'm curious if you have thoughts or experiences of particularly daunting ways in which the large-scale conversation appears to be controlled, and also if you have particularly encouraging pockets, which I was very encouraged when you briefly said, yeah, we're working on that kind of issue right now, and we'll be doing more of that. So I'm sorry again to be asking such a long question. No. If you have anything to share in terms of that control that I'm trying to point at, in multi-layers of control at a large scale of our global conversation, and anything that's encouraging about that as well. So take it away.
Yeah, please. Yeah. Well, I think I think you're absolutely right. First of all, I mean, I think there is, especially in this country, a clampdown on the dialogue and a clampdown on the ability to again confront the naked reality that's really there. But I guess I take hope in the fact that that these conversations are happening, and that it's impossible to cover the truth. I think it really is. And I think when you leave the US and you go to other countries, these conversations are in a much more advanced stage. Mm-hmm. So it's, maybe it's hard for us to see here, because there's still this quote unquote debate, I put the debate in quotes, but I mean, that's, and this is something we talked about at Lafayette in the Q&A, that this is the playbook, is the tobacco playbook. I mean, a lot of other industries are, the carbon producing industries are using this very old playbook where they're intentionally creating mistrust and doubt as to very hard science as to what's going on. Mm-hmm. And if we had 50 to 100 years, because that's basically how long it took in the tobacco cases, but if we had that length of time, we could use the court systems, I think, to uncover all that. The problem is we don't have that time. Courts are very conservative in the sense that they like taking their time, as they should. There's a lot of the stuff is complex, and but the problem is we're running out of time. And so, in terms of the hope, I think what we need from the legal profession, I think lawyers are, inside every lawyer, and this seems hard to see sometimes, but inside every lawyer there is an idealist. I think that there are a lot of people who do go to law school for very idealistic reasons. That gets beaten out of them slowly but surely. But I think there is something that remains that, and I think lawyers are waking up to these challenges. I think as lawyers, we can advocate not only in the courts but also with public opinion, and the most successful cases usually combine the two. Usually there is a robust public discourse and dialogue that acts as the foundation for a larger legal maneuver or larger legal strategy. And so I do think, I think, and there are techniques where you can bring issues to courts immediately through injunctions or through other kind of classic common law remedies. You can actually ask a court to rule on something very quickly. Mm-hmm. I think what I'm thinking, as a lawyer, the key is to find, you look for the pressure point. There's always a pressure point somewhere in the law or with a certain fact pattern. And the key, I think, is to, you have to take a very Zen approach. If you just, if you just take a bunch of people and you slam yourself against a wall, you can win over 20 years. I mean, we don't have that length of time. So I think we have to, as lawyers, adopt legal strategies that are more Zen and are more, like covert ops type of thing, where we find the weakness in the wall and you use a strategy like that. And that's the high level kind of thinking that goes into some of the legal research and maybe on the standing question, or, I know lawyers are looking hard. The Attorney General of New York is looking hard at some of the science that we just talked about, the climate denialism science, in terms of the doubt that's been placed in the discourse. So yeah, I mean, I think that in terms of, I would agree with you that there is a clampdown. I am optimistic. I think you can't hide it forever. And I also think that it's enough for us to just do what we can. I mean, I think sometimes what's so daunting about all this is knowing that there is a transition that's coming. We don't know how hard of a transition it's going to be. We know it will be hard in some aspects. And I know that good, decent people sometimes think that we have to stop it all, or that we have to do, that, there's lives will be lost, and lives will be lost, that otherwise wouldn't have died. I think that that's all very true. But I think it's enough for us as sitting here and on November 25th, 2017, to just do what we can. As long as we're doing what we can, and I think we're doing our best to awaken other people to the reality, I think that's as much as we can do. I don't think we should be plagued by guilt about, a lot of this was set in motion, well before our time. And, we can't, in the face of this epic struggle ahead, I think we have to find some peace about the fact that we are going to do what we can and the best we can, but the outcome is really not in our hands, and if we can look back and say we did the best we can, I think we've done enough. So.
Fair enough. I again am in your court about that. There's this, I've been really blessed in my life. I grew up in a very tough environment with alcoholic parents and a tremendous amount of drama to get through and so on. And somehow I was blessed from quite early on with a series of immersions in a state of being that I've come to call grace. Now I'm clear, I'm not the person who's inventing that word or coining it, but I've talked enough with some very religious people to know that this is one way that they and I can connect, because many folks who have a lot of religious experience have some exposure to this state of grace. I have never been a religious person. If anything, I've been anti religion most of my life. But here I am 3 years ago starting this book and having many, many of these impossible conversations along the way. And many of them were with evangelicals who are not only religious where I am not, but also anti-stewardship of the earth, anti-consciousness about imminent collapse of human and earth systems, not the least of which is climate change. So there's all kinds of reasons why we should just be spitting at one another.
Yeah.
But in these impossible conversations, in the context that I had created for them, we got to share about exactly the place that you just got to, which is, in my words, some amount of this experience of grace.
Mm-hmm.
That if we can find a place, that place in which we really, our soul or the center of us, our heart to be sure, is opened up and is fully present. And so it's a matter not of productivity and getting things done and being in the business as usual paradigm. It is in fact somewhere very much on a different end of the spectrum, where those usual outcomes and usual metrics and usual ways of determining, am I successful in this world, fade away. They gently release. And the judgments that are usually with them, that have us so polarized in our world, also tend to drift away. So here we are, myself and this, maybe a couple of fundamentalist Christians, or people somehow or another, somebody very different than myself.
Yeah.
And we're having a conversation and we're finding a common ground in a place that I just heard you describing, that place of releasing ourselves from the kind of constructs that we built around ourselves and called that reality.
Yeah.
And in releasing that, what we're left with is the quality of our presence in any given moment. That's what I was hearing.
Yes, absolutely right. I think, and I think this goes back to something that you mentioned at the very beginning, or that maybe we talked about, which is the daunting challenge that's presented. And I think, you'd mentioned that that there are this abruptness notion, this notion of abrupt climate change, and this notion that the systems could really change dramatically very quickly. And I think I think we have to put that likelihood on the table. I think that is a possibility.
Yeah.
And I think that in the face of that, how can you not, there's a sense of like freaking out, right? Like, or a lot of depression. I know people who work in climate science, or who are journalists on climate, and many of them are depressed, and I can't blame them. I mean, this can be a very depressing topic. And I think, I think it does present fundamentally a spiritual challenge to us. I think because once you've had that awakening, once you've seen the shadows for what they are, you can't go back. I mean, once you can't. Even you can try, but it's impossible. And I think you really have to ask yourself, what is it? What is my reaction to all this? In the face of all this that I know and accept, what is my reaction? And I think we have to. I think we have to accept the possibility of complete failure. I mean, that's the table. We could do everything we want, and it could be even worse than we think. So I think that's true. But I think by kind of freeing ourselves from, in yoga, there's this notion of you don't think about the outcome, right? You're more focused on you're focused on your work and your labor. And the outcome is for the universe to determine. It's not for us to determine. So I think, it's very helpful to just leave the outcome. We know what the outcomes are, right? So let's leave that aside for the moment and just ask, knowing what we know today, what does our life today look like? What do our choices today look like? And if I think that there are plenty of people who are awakening and who are awakening every day. And I think maybe people like you and I, or others, scientists, who are out there, it's our job to kind of shepherd them through that process and to say, don't be frightened. We can do it. We can try our best, and we'll see what happens. But that's the most I think we can do. And I think because there is a lot of negative emotion that can arise, and I think that's very natural. But I think it's debilitating and it's not useful. So to the extent it's not useful, we should focus on other things, because part of the old paradigm, what you call the business as usual paradigm, which I like that expression quite a lot. There is a lot of negative emotion and pressure and expectations. Counting your money in the bank account, seeing the numbers go up. I mean, that's basically what the goals are. And there's already so much negativity that people are coming from. So if nothing else, I feel like for people who are awakening to these challenges, it's important to show them a path of both of a spiritual awakening, like you put it, like we're the blossoming, and I think that that's a very important kind of thing, because I think, in creating the better future and creating the possibility of a positive outcome, you and I have to create that wavelength. You and I are creating that wavelength now, and we're inviting other people to join that wavelength, so that there is a possibility of something positive. And hopefully, if enough people do that, the discourse changes, the possibilities change, opportunities arise where there weren't opportunities before, and all of a sudden, we see a future that will be different. Don't get me wrong. I mean, a lot of these changes are going to happen regardless, but at least there's a possibility of some type of blossoming and some type of not just survival, but more than survival, a flourishing. That's what we can hope for. I think a flourishing.
Right. Well said. That's a pretty great segue into the work that my creative partner and I. Her name is Carolyn Baker, and Carolyn is easily the most prolific author that addresses exactly what you and I are talking about. Pretty much the core question is, who will we be together in the face of these shared global predicaments?
Yeah.
And her books she's an exquisite writer, and it's really a privilege to be working with her. And we've just been doing our first couple of pilot courses intended to be safe environments for people to have these almost heretical conversations. These are still not safe conversations to be had, because I think what you and I are talking about is nothing less than the dismantling of, if not the shredding of, our core narrative.
Yeah.
Who we are, how we do what we do. America is the greatest because of this, and this. All of those are getting shredded in the current reality that we're in. So a safe container in which people can do that dismantling consciously, and also look at rebuilding and reinventing consciously who they are and who they'll be together. And so I'm thrilled that particular piece is moving forward. We're involving that. And I'm also really, again, just delighted that you're creating your particular take on how to participate in this reinvention of who we are, our reinvention of our core narrative, which is really what I think it all boils down to. And I don't think I'm alone that you really have broken the mold that most of us have for lawyers. Like, you all don't think about these kind of things. You don't think about outside of business as usual paradigm. You're ensconced in the center of business as usual paradigm, and to be reviled for that. And so I think you've done an extraordinary job of cracking that mold and breaking out of it, and creating not just a positive view and positive thinking and so on, but what you just described, that ability, that intention to not just endure or survive the changes that are obviously imminent, but actually to find a way to learn and grow and thrive.
Yes, correct.
And that's literally word for word the definition we use when we talk about transformational resilience.
Amazing. Yeah.
There's actually a conference, there's an association that's just started up a couple years ago out of an organization in Eugene, talking about exactly that, transformational resilience. Mm-hmm. And the whole notion of getting people resilience skills and um, adverse childhood experiences
Mm,
based and
yeah,
trauma based institutions so that people have some way to have a healing context for this moving
yeah,
forward. That this is where the transformation comes through. This is where the thriving comes through, is that we have another way of viewing this daunting thing that's either that we're either experiencing right now or is obviously coming our way.
yeah,
Is just like we started with your talk about Puerto Rico.
yeah,
What
yeah,
better example of a time when we would do well to find those not just resilience skills, but transformational resilience skills, find some ability to thrive in these things that look like they're stacked up to take us down.
yeah. That's 100% true, and I want to unpack a lot of what you said there too. So one of the things is this notion, I think, of trauma being a source of power, or being able to thrive because of the trauma adding something, a possibility of greater transformation that comes through the trauma. I think that's right. I mean, I think that that's a teaching and a philosophy that should really explore and really encourage in terms of developing that, because there is going to be a lot of trauma. I mean, and I'm talking about people losing their homes. I'm talking about climate refugees. I mean, there's a study I read just a couple of weeks ago that talked about 2 billion refugees by the end of the century, moving because of climate, because of rising seas, because of
Mhm.
hurricanes, fires. Uh, Everything is going to be challenged. Every daily aspect of our lives is going to be a challenge. And I don't think the problem is that our governments are not prepared for this. And in fact, especially our government currently, the current government is doing what it can to kind of stick its head in the ground in a lot of ways. So there is going to be a rude awakening, so to speak, for a lot of people. And there is going to be a lot of trauma. And I think something that we can develop in the last, perhaps, waning years of stability, of real stability, that we'll look back on and say, what a stable time. I think we can start preparing ourselves psychologically and philosophically and spiritually with these types of philosophies and doctrines as vehicles to help us get through, I think, these transitional years that are, I think, have already started. I love what you said about that, and I think that stuff is very important. The other comment I wanted to talk about was just like the lawyers, and I know you're right. I mean, I know that we have a very bad reputation. I know that, and I think part of the reason we have such a bad reputation is that lawyers, um, are powerful. I mean, we're trained how to speak, how to argue, and how to present positions. And you see, unfortunately, too many people use those talents as hired guns for whatever position. And I think there is a lot of rightful cynicism about the profession. But I do want to reiterate that I think that in a lot of lawyers there was and there is still a closet idealist, and I think part of what I'm hoping to do as a lawyer is speak to my profession and speak to other lawyers and remind them of that and say, we have these talents and we have these skills that we've been cultivating and honing. What if we're important members of this movement, of this army, that can really make a big difference if we were to shift things. And I'm part of what I'm doing through the nonprofit is we set up programs with law schools, and I haven't. This has been brought to me, but I haven't cultivated it yet. But I mean, part of what I'm thinking about doing is laying out or writing more about career opportunities for lawyers, because as a lawyer, as many young professionals face today, there's a mountain of debt that you have to work through. There's a mountain of just rents are sky high. The possibility of family, of having children, these things have been priced out for a lot of young professionals who are in their 20s, coming out of university and law school. And I know one reaction is to say, I'm just going to do what I've been told to do and trained to do, and just enter this system and not think about anything else. But I think what I could do, for example, as someone who's built an alternative career path, is to show people that there are alternatives, that it's totally you can live and eat and make a comfortable life for yourself while also doing things that you're passionate about doing. One of the things that I remind myself every day is that historically speaking, I live like a king. I have access to running water. I have clean, food that I can eat. There's healthcare. I mean, it's expensive, but there's healthcare. If I get sick, I won't die of an infection. And these are things that humans have struggled with for hundreds of thousands of years. And it's really the last 100 years that, we live like a king, better than a king would have lived like 100 years ago. So knowing that I have this stability, knowing that I have these comforts historically that are really unprecedented, why should I participate in this constant mind game that I need more and more and more, and that there's a certain thing, career that I have to build for myself that's been foisted on me by expectations? I mean, using the historic comforts that I have, I can build a completely different career and really, create some good at a time in which people like me and other lawyers, maybe were needed more than ever. So that's part of what I'm hoping to do with a nonprofit as well, is not preach to the choir, but preach to people who should join the choir. So, yeah.
Well, I'm noticing that my eyes are drawn up to what I've got on the screen here. It's the last sentence of your talk at Lafayette College, and if I may, it's you're talking about what really appears to be the calling of these times. And we obviously have choices. We always have choices. And so some of the default choices could be to just continue with business as usual and bury our heads down and noses to the grindstone and not do anything of particular value as we face the imminent collapse of systems. But you, of course, are talking about something else, a different choice. And you talk about our children do not demand of us that we succeed in this effort, but they are entitled to demand of us that we try. And, these aren't the first times that I've heard, this isn't the first time I've heard these words, but I've got to say, Inder, that your particular way of putting words and thoughts and notions together, you have a remarkable ability to, again, just crack out of that which is an otherwise debilitating mold of your profession. Yeah. And you've allowed your heart to come through in such a potent way. I'm wondering if you could orient the folks who are watching to how can they find more of your writing? How can they find some of these notions that you've laid out so beautifully in your blog and so on? Can you give us some information?
Yeah, well, sure. They can go. There's two websites I point them to. One is Just Atonement, which is justatonement.org, and that's the nonprofit, the legal nonprofit that I've set up and that I've referenced. The other is my personal website, which is indercomar.com. And that's where I'm posting a lot of the speaking series and the talks that I'm giving, where I'm going to start posting those directly there. And what I'm making that website for, Just Atonement, is the legal work. And indercomar.com I view as more of the spiritual work and the psychological work that we have to start doing to adapt. And, it's oriented really towards three different audiences. One is, I think, and all oriented toward this awakening that I've talked about. This kind of satori moment, the Japanese would say, the Zen would say, this notion that you have this insight and your whole life changes, right? And the website is geared, I think, towards three different audiences. One is young professionals, so people who are just leaving university, just leaving graduate school, wondering what they're going to do. And I want to lay out a framework for them because we need those people. And I think the system has treated those people so unfairly. I think it's saddled them with debt. I think it's saddled them with so many unrealistic expectations, really deprived them of economic opportunities. They've done everything that they were supposed to do, quote unquote, and they come out with very little opportunity. Mm-hmm. And so I want to reach those people and tell them that, join these efforts, do this instead, figure out a way where your talents can be used in a way that can push the world in a better direction.
Mhm.
The second is what I would call transitioning professionals. So people who've been in corporate America or doing traditional business work and they've reached their own moment somehow, like me, wondering what is, and like you, it sounded like as well, and I want to reach those people because they're struggling also with answers or questions, and I want to lay out a path for them. And the third is, I think, corporate and business and government leaders, and to suggest to them that one of the big group that we're going to need is our leaders. We need our leaders to provide leadership, and that sounds like a silly thing to say, but any walk of life, any business, anywhere, everywhere you look, there's a real vacuum of vision and a real vacuum of leadership in terms of where the world needs to be going and what the challenges are that need to be addressed. And I want to be able to provide some type of advice to those people. They don't, and just so they can help in their own way in terms of providing a vision to us who are looking to them to help us. So I'll be putting writings and I'm blogging there every day, putting links to the talks that I'm giving. If people are interested in those types of things, they can check out that website. But yeah, I think that those are the places I would point to people. And my hope is that we can build really a movement. We can really build. I think, like I said, I know the science is dire. I think we are already in the process of systemic challenge and possible collapse. I think that process has already begun. Mm-hmm. So, and I think, like I said, there is the possibility of complete and utter failure, right? So those things are all on the table. I think, and like you mentioned, the last sentence of the Lafayette talk, this is an ethical and a challenge for us. I think if we are a species that is worth saving, that if we are a species that deserves to kind of have our moment on this earth continue, I think we have to reach another level of development, with our consciousness that requires us to become more pacific, and to use dialogue and to work together and to become real guardians of this consciousness on the earth. I mean, we've talked about climate change a lot, but the other thing in the background is the extinction that we're going through, the mass extinction event that's related, where scientists have declared this the sixth great extinction in our geological history, and that is a stunning indictment of us as a species and our inability to act as real guardians for the other forms of life on this earth. And you talked about, it's interesting, I haven't had as many conversations with religious groups as perhaps you have, but in the Bible, humans are the stewards of the earth. And I mean, in every religious tradition, there's this concept that we are the stewards. So this should be something that resonates with the religious people amongst us. But the fact of the matter is that even if climate change wasn't an issue, and obviously it is, and somehow we developed some magical technology that removed all the carbon from the air, it wouldn't change the fact that 90% of the species that are alive today may not be alive in 100 years, and that's another problem. So all of that at root, the root of all these problems is us and something in us, and I think there is there's definitely a component of greed that I think we have to really, kind of learn to master. The greed that is a natural phenomenon, we have to learn to master that as humans. The ignorance that we have about the world, the hatreds that we carry. I mean, these are things. These are the challenges, and I think the big one right now is greed. And part of the problem is we've created systems where we let the greedy take what they will with very little control, and this is the result. And so being able to and at the end of the day, if we're really going to have a successful outcome here, I think we have to approach the greedy and we have to sit with them and we have to figure out a way and get them to realize that they don't have to be so greedy, and there's enough for everyone on this earth. There really is. There's no shortage of abundance on the earth, but there is. If we let the greedy in charge, they'll there won't be enough for everybody. So
Mhm.
I think those are the real challenges, and I think those fundamentally are inner challenges. And if we want to see peace here on the outside, we have to start building the peace on the inside. And I think when we do that, the whole world starts to change, from out of us. And these are the things that I think we have to start talking to other lawyers about, talking to corporate leaders about, because they are very educated, cultivated people. But there's a side of their education that is missing. And we bring this education in, and I think you could really start to see some very important, crucial changes that could permit a more positive outcome in the next 100 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, I'm with you. If I could just share my version of the short version of what you just laid out so beautifully, is I kept asking myself the question, what got us here?
Yeah.
While I was writing the book and doing the research, what got us here? Why? What? And always the answer came back in some version or another of we've disconnected.
Mm-hmm.
We disconnected from deeper self. We disconnected from each other.
Yeah.
We disconnected from the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I could distill it down to that simple nodule and a little gold nugget in the center, I could then start to look at, if not the business as usual way of being that is clearly suicidal and ecocidal, then what?
Yeah.
And it made it a bit easier for me, a bit simpler to be able to say, if not that, then reconnection.
Yeah.
If I orient the practices, there's a story from a dear friend that describes to face these daunting spiritual challenges, these imminent massive stressors, to face these things without a set of spiritual practices in our lives is as foolish as running into a forest fire wearing nothing but a paper tutu.
Right. Yeah.
And so, part of again what Carolyn Baker and I are putting together in our line of work is to create not only those safe environments, but also to suggest a robust set of practices that people form for themselves.
Yeah.
That are based exclusively on addressing their disconnection in their lives. Mm-hmm. How can I reconnect with my inner wisdom, with my inner sensitivities? How can I connect with other people in a deep and hopefully profound way? How can I reconnect with the earth, which is I'm so desperately far from?
Yeah.
So, Inder, I really just want to thank you so much for this first, what I hope is a series of talks over time. I so thank you for creating the life that you've created, the beauty that you obviously have created by cracking out of the usual look and feel of a corporate-oriented lawyer and so on. Your heart just comes out streaming through your work, through your writings that I've been able to read. And I think that the populations that you were just describing, that you're going to be continuing to do talks for and presentations for and work with, they are blessed to have you. So as we have been blessed to have you today. So thank you so much for spending time.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Dean. It was a real pleasure. And it sounds like we're all very aligned, I think, at a deep level. And I think that's all I look forward to continuing the dialogue. And, I think that's what we should be doing, is just building that shared wavelength. And I think that that really can make a huge difference. And it was a real pleasure to be here. Thanks a lot, Dean.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for joining us here on another episode of The Poetry of Predicament. Our guest today, Inder Comar. Hope to have him back many times. And we've had music, of course, from Michael Hedges and Port Blue. And if you want to get a hold of us here at Poetry of Predicament or our sister programs, the Impossible Conversation podcast and beyond, feel free to give us a look-see over at livingresilience.net or theimpossibleconversation.net. Look forward to seeing you or speaking with you, or perhaps even having you as a guest here on Poetry of Predicament podcast.